He may be even more famous than his friend Sean Diddy Combs, and now he's facing similar accusations of sexual assault in civil court. But Jay-Z isn't backing down without a fight. We're going to be taking a closer look at the longtime friendship between the music moguls and how their connection could have serious ripple effects. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Since even before Sean Diddy Combs was arrested in September, even as far back as March when his two mansions were raided by agents from the Department of Homeland Security, there has been speculation that Combs' celebrity friends, his associates, that they could all be pulled into this legal nightmare. And one of the people at risk, often mentioned online, was Jay-Z, real name Shawn Carter, who came up in the New York rap scene alongside Sean Combs. And just a few days ago, Texas attorney Tony Buzbee made it official. He filed an amended complaint on behalf of a Jane Doe who says that she was raped by Combs and Carter when she was just 13 years old, that this happened at a VMA's after party back in 2000. Now, the original complaint mentioned Celebrity A and Celebrity B, a man and woman, as being present for and even Celebrity A participating in the alleged assault. Well, now Celebrity A has been identified as Jay-Z, who has adamantly denied anything like that ever happening. He is very, very clear on that. In fact, he has accused Tony Buzbee of extortion, saying that Buzbee's attempts to get celebrities to pay out huge sums of money in exchange for not being named in civil lawsuits with what he claims are false allegations amounts to blackmail. In fact, Jay-Z is believed to be the John Doe who just recently filed a lawsuit against Tony Buzbee anonymously, claiming extortion and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we'll get to more of that in just a moment. But first, I want to focus on these connections between Jay-Z and Sean Combs. I mean, after all, why were people making these associations between the two even before there was a lawsuit? Well, let's go back in time. 1997, after their mutual friend Biggie Smalls was killed, Jay-Z and Combs collaborated, and they collaborated on Combs' second album, for example, In My Lifetime, Volume 1. They both faced criminal charges in the late 90s, Jay-Z for allegedly stabbing a man at a club in New York, Combs for fleeing the scene of a nightclub shooting also in New York. Both avoided jail time, got probation instead. The two reportedly bonded over their experiences. Both men were wildly successful in their careers as music producers and rappers. Forbes announced in 2019 that Jay-Z became hip-hop's first billionaire. Reportedly now has an estimated net worth of around $2.5 billion, again, according to Forbes. 2021, Forbes reported Combs was worth around $900 million. Became a billionaire in 2022, reportedly. Now, to be clear, since then, with everything going on, he's lost brand deals, other investments, so now he's estimated to have a net worth at around $400 million. But going back to Jay-Z, he is, of course, married to Beyonce, right? The two started dating in the early 2000s when Beyonce was reportedly 19, Jay-Z 33. Beyonce collaborated with Sean Combs, though, on a song in 2003 called Summertime. And the three music titans, they were often seen at parties and public events over the last few decades together, photos, videos of them together. Now, Jay-Z's family is standing behind him during this recent development, this lawsuit. In fact, the family appeared together at the Los Angeles premiere of Disney's Mufasa: The Lion King on Monday. That's, by the way, the same day that it was announced this rape lawsuit came to be. And by the way, 12-year-old Blue Ivy, Beyonce and Jay-Z's oldest daughter, she co-stars with her mom in the new film. Now, Jay-Z and Diddy, they have had similar paths in the music industry and entertainment world when you think about it. For instance, both have their own entertainment companies, Roc Nation for Jay-Z, Bad Boy Entertainment for Combs. Roc Nation represents artists like Rihanna and J. Cole. Bad Boy has signed Machine Gun Kelly, Janelle Monáe. Both men dip their toes into the fashion world. Jay-Z and Damon Dash are the founders of Rocawear. Combs launched Sean John. The duo have also used their fame to leverage major deals with liquor brands. Combs is famous for his partnership with Ciroc Vodka, often featuring it in his music videos, at his infamous parties. Jay-Z invested millions of dollars in Armand de Bernac champagne before he eventually sold his stake in the company for more than $300 million. 2015, Jay-Z launched Tidal, this music streaming service. Combs started the television network Revolt TV in 2013. And both Combs and Jay-Z, they have been very instrumental in the music industry and have launched the careers of other artists. They both famously mentored Usher, who has said that he went to New York to learn about the business when he was still a teen, got a crash course in what the scene was like in the early 2000s. And years later, by the way, Combs would offer the same type of mentorship to a young Justin Bieber. Both Jay-Z and Combs, they appeared alongside DJ Khaled as he was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2022. So you have two titans in the music industry who appeared to be quite close. And all of this just goes to show how much time Jay-Z and Combs have spent together over the past few decades. Is it possible that Jay-Z had no idea of the accusations against Shawn Combs? I mean, assuming that these allegations are true, allegations that he raped and sexually assaulted both men and women, even children, and that he held these freak-offs, basically these orgies that involve commercial sex workers and drugs and camera equipment. Is it possible Jay-Z didn't know anything about this, assuming these allegations are true? And now Jay-Z finds himself caught up in this scandal because Tony Busby has named him in this lawsuit. And before I even go into the lawsuit for a second, the fact that he has just been sued and the fact that he is fighting this, you do have to wonder, will other people come forward with other lawsuits against Jay-Z? These are just allegations. We don't know if they're true or not. But what happened with Shawn Combs? Once Cassandra Ventura filed a lawsuit against him, every lawsuit came out. So it'll be very curious to see what happens next. But to be clear, what does Tony Busby say about Jay-Z, the artist, the businessman? Well, the complaint begins. Defendant Shawn Combs, along with his longtime friend and collaborator, Shawn Carter, drugged and raped a 13-year-old girl at an after-party following the 2000 Video Music Awards. Another celebrity stood by and watched as Combs and Carter took turns assaulting the minor. Many others were present at the after-party but did nothing to stop the assault. Combs had been allowed for years to conduct himself in this manner without any consequences. He believes he is above the law. He is not. His close friend Shawn Carter has been with Combs during many such instances described herein. Both perpetrators must face justice. So that seems to suggest that Shawn Carter, Jay-Z, was not only present or participated in this alleged, what is essentially a crime, but for other instances. And that's really interesting. That's why I bring up this idea of, could he be hit with more lawsuits if you take these allegations as true? Now, the complaint goes on to say, Combs and Carter were not simply occasional collaborators in the music industry. The two men developed a close friendship that has been well documented from the late 1990s to the present. Together, they attended countless music industry events, events for each other's business ventures, parties, and after-parties. Indeed, the two are apparently so close that Combs stated in 2023 that Carter is the only person, other than Combs' mother, who is allowed to call him by his legal first name of Shawn. In 2000, near the height of their fame, power, and influence, Combs and Carter attended the 2000 Video Music Awards in New York City. Afterwards, Combs hosted an after-party for many of the most famous celebrities in the music and entertainment industries, including Carter, which is where the events alleged in this complaint occurred. And by the way, as an aside, let me also say real quick, it's not just us here at Law&Crime that have been covering these Diddy stories and updates for you. Websites all over the internet are grabbing readers with headlines like, Puff Daddy stays in jail for trying to influence witnesses. Woman sues Shawn Combs for raping her. And that is exactly where a platform like Ground News comes in. So what they are is a small independent team that we actually partner with because they can help us deliver just the facts when we report on stories like this. You can go to ground.news/sidebar to follow along while I show you how it works with this Diddy story. So we get a quick summary of how Diddy's lawyers claim prosecutors allegedly unlawfully obtained his jail cell notes, including attorney-client privileged information. Remember that? Well, based on every source that Ground News found on reporting on this, the left are clearly dominating coverage, making this a potential blind spot for more conservative news consumers. But it's not just about who's covering the story, it's also about how they're covering it. Well, Ground News calculated the majority of these articles come from highly credible sources, so you can instantly see which headlines are more objective and which might be skewing the facts. The bottom line here, don't let someone else's spin shape your understanding of the truth. Just head to ground.news/sidebar or scan the QR code right there and use our link to save 50% off of the top tier Vantage plan, which offers unlimited access. It's the same plan that we've been using. So thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar. And I should also say that Busby also used this complaint to address an alleged harassment campaign that he claims Jay-Z started after Busby reached out about his involvement in the suit. The complaint reads, Carter was identified in plaintiff's original complaint as Celebrity A. Prior to the filing of this amended complaint, Carter received a letter from plaintiff's counsel requesting a mediation to resolve this matter. Upon present information and belief, Jay-Z responded to said letter by not only filing an utterly frivolous lawsuit, the one that I mentioned before, but by also orchestrating a conspiracy of harassment, bullying, and intimidation against plaintiffs' lawyers, their families, employees, and former associates in an attempt to silence plaintiff from naming Jay-Z herein. This effort was meant to scare plaintiff and to discredit her counsel. That effort failed. Indeed, plaintiff chose to file this amendment as a result of the egregious conduct perpetuated by Carter. So for now, the plaintiff has filed as a Jane Doe, keeping her identity as a secret. Jay-Z's legal team has filed a flurry of legal paperwork calling for her to be unmasked so that Jay-Z can face his accuser on an even playing field. We'll see how that shakes out. I actually dedicated a whole other sidebar to that. But for now, we don't know her name. Now, I will say, it is interesting, as we're talking about how close Jay-Z and Sean Combs are, or were, because based on the recent filings from Jay-Z's legal team in response to this lawsuit, there seems to be, arguably, a distancing of Jay-Z from Sean Combs. Why do I say that? Because, for instance, in Jay-Z's effort to say that Jane Doe should not remain anonymous, they address the argument from Jane Doe where she says, look, I can't reveal my name for security reasons, that Combs has engaged in threats of violence in the past, that if I reveal who I am, I could be in danger. Okay, Jay-Z responds to that by saying, or his counsel responds to that by saying the following. Plaintiff's counsel stresses that other alleged victims he represents have stated that Mr. Combs made threats of violence against them or against the client's family members if the client disclosed to anyone the facts of the sexual assaults. But there is certainly no allegation that Carter ever threatened to harm plaintiff, nor could he, as he has no idea who she is. Or how about this? Those cases concerned Combs, who is under indictment and detained following a raft of criminal and civil allegations against him. But plaintiff has now sought to sully the reputation of Mr. Carter, who has never been accused of misconduct in his 37 adult years. So you're seeing that distancing in a way, at least that's what I saw. Now, going back to the actual complaint here, let's talk about it. So Jane Doe claims that when she was 13 years old, she went to the VMAs, the Video Music Awards in New York City. Now, she said she didn't have a ticket, so she couldn't get into the event, but she walked around outside Radio City Music Hall, where one of the limo drivers for Sean Combs reportedly told her to come back later and that he would take her to a party that Combs was throwing. So Jane Doe claims that when she got there, she had to sign paperwork that she didn't really understand, reportedly some sort of non-disclosure agreement. And she was also allegedly handed a drink at this party, which she believes was drugged. She says she started feeling woozy, she didn't feel right, so she went to find somewhere to lay down. The complaint says Combs entered the room along with defendant Carter and a female celebrity, Celebrity B. Plaintiff immediately recognized all three celebrities. Combs aggressively approached plaintiff with a crazed look in his eyes, grabbed her and said, "You are ready to party." Combs then threw plaintiff toward a wall, causing plaintiff to fall. Plaintiff got up and stumbled, at which point Combs grabbed her again and threw her on the bed. At that point, Carter began removing plaintiff's clothes as she grew more and more disoriented. Jane Doe claims that both Jay-Z and Sean Combs raped her that night before she was finally able to get away. The lawsuit says Combs then knocked plaintiff down and attempted to force plaintiff to perform oral sex on him. She fought back, standing up quickly and punching out at the same time, hitting Combs in the neck. Taken aback, Combs stopped his attempt. When Combs backed away in surprise, plaintiff grabbed her clothes and shoes and ran out of the bedroom, holding her dress in front of her like a towel. She ran around the residence until she found the front door and was able to leave the party. Although there were other guests still at the party, no one appeared to take notice of plaintiff's distress or attempted to help her. Once outside, plaintiff put her clothes back on and left the scene in the dark. And she says she was able to make it to a gas station and call for her dad to come pick her up. So this allegedly happened in 2000, by the way. It's now 2024. Hasn't there been a statute of limitations issue? Hasn't the time run out even on a serious claim like this? Well, this is a civil case, not a criminal case. But also Jane Doe is filing under New York City's Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act. And that provides a look-back window for victims to file these kinds of claims against their alleged abusers. It doesn't even have to be sexual abuse. It just has to be violence that is motivated by gender. So the complaint explains a little bit more how this fits in. It says the requirement that the crime of violence be committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due at least in part to an animus based on the victim's gender is satisfied because defendants Combs and Carter forced minor plaintiff to engage in a sexual interaction without consent. Jane Doe could not effectively consent because of her age. The non-consensual sexual touching of a minor herein presented a serious risk of physical injury and in fact caused such injury. And by the way, Combs and Jay-Z, they aren't the only people named as defendants in this case. The complaint also names several of Combs' businesses, like Bad Boy Entertainment LLC and Combs Enterprises LLC. The complaint alleges the Combs businesses enabled and conspired with Combs and Carter to commit the crime of violence motivated by gender because Combs and Carter sexually assaulted plaintiff at a party related to or referencing Combs' business. So for now, the focus of the legal fight for Jay-Z is getting the judge to rule that Jane Doe must reveal her identity or throw out the lawsuit. And by the way, if she has to reveal her identity, there's a chance she might not proceed with this case. Does she want to be public going after both Shawn Combs and Jay-Z? It's something you have to think about. Now, Jay-Z's version of what happened here is that he refused to be what he and his lawyers call extorted or blackmailed by Tony Buzbee. In fact, in a statement in response to the lawsuit, Jay-Z said in part, quote, "My lawyer received a blackmail attempt called a demand letter from a lawyer named Tony Buzbee. What he had calculated was the nature of these allegations and the public scrutiny would make me want to settle. No, sir. It had the opposite effect. It made me want to expose you for the fraud you are in a very public fashion. So no, I will not give you one red penny." And also said in his statement, "You have made a terrible error in judgment, thinking that all celebrities are the same." And then later he said, "I look forward to showing you just how different I am." Now, Buzbee also responded on X denying that this was the case, writing in part, quote, "No one has made any threats. Jay-Z's assertions are bogus and laughable. Instead, our firm sent a standard demand letter seeking a mediation on behalf of a woman who alleges Jay-Z sexually assaulted her as a minor. The letter was vetted and approved by our client, whose preference was to attempt resolution short of filing a lawsuit. This approach is common in these types of cases. What you are seeing played out now is a coordinated and desperate effort to focus the public's attention on me personally to avoid attention on the allegations being made by my clients." And we learned that Jay-Z is also believed to be the John Doe who recently filed a lawsuit anonymously against Tony Buzbee, claiming extortion and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We didn't know who it was, but it seems to be that it was Jay-Z. And now there is also this heated back and forth about whether Jane Doe in this lawsuit should be able to proceed anonymously in her lawsuit. Jay-Z and his legal team are pushing for her to have her reveal herself, partly because they say Jay-Z has a right to know his accuser, to investigate her claims, to challenge her. It's only fair. Buzbee counters by saying this is highly sensitive material and revealing her identity could cause her further trauma. Also, there is a safety concern about her identifying herself. And now, in an interesting side tidbit, which we'll get into, a woman allegedly reached out to Jay-Z's legal team explaining her experiences with Tony Buzbee's law firm, where she is essentially claiming that she was dropped as a client when she refused to adopt a sexual assault narrative that the firm wanted her to proceed with. It's shocking. I'm going to get into that. But for that and so much more, I have to bring on one of our favorites, renowned litigator, trial attorney Ben Shue, who famously represented Johnny Depp in his very high-profile civil trial against Amber Heard. My goodness. I mean, what do you want to talk about first? You want to first talk about the allegations in the Jay-Z lawsuit before we talk about the legal war that's going on? What do you make of the fact that he has been identified in this case and the allegations against him?
Good morning, Jesse. It's great to see you again. Yeah, these are shocking allegations, and I think he's put out a very forceful statement against them, which I think is a good move, both legally and in terms of PR. You know, assuming, of course, that he is innocent of that. I think these are the kinds of allegations that one would expect someone falsely accused to push back on extremely strongly, which he has now done.
For people who haven't read the complaint, let me just give them a sample. It reads, Combs then threw plaintiff toward a wall. Again, allegedly 13 years old when this happened. Combs then threw plaintiff toward a wall, causing plaintiff to fall. Plaintiff got up and stumbled, at which point Combs grabbed her again and threw her on the bed. At that point, Carter began removing plaintiff's clothes as she grew more and more disoriented. And then the complaint says that Jay-Z raped this 13-year-old, and then Diddy allegedly raped her too. And she claims she actually fought back, hit Combs in the neck, was able to grab her clothes, run out of the room. Ben, could she win a case like this based purely on her testimony? If this is so old, maybe there's no surveillance, maybe there's no text messages, maybe there's no forensics. Could she win based purely on her account of what happened?
She could theoretically win if her testimony were especially compelling, but I think you put your finger on one of the real weaknesses, is that these allegations are ancient. One thing that leapt out to me is the allegations also include that there was a witness,
Yes.
other than Diddy, who a female, another woman. Her testimony, and obviously she will be subpoenaed, could be crucial. I mean, if that testimony corroborated the plaintiff's claims, then that would be something that would really be a game changer. But the plaintiff alone, I think, is going to face some credibility issues, especially when you have Jay-Z. I mean, Diddy, the allegations are pretty widespread, but there haven't been similar allegations about Jay-Z, and that really sets his case apart.
I believe you're referring to Celebrity B, this female celebrity who was in that room. Do you think this person has settled maybe her claims with Tony Buzbee? What do I mean by that? If she was present, I imagine that Tony Buzbee might have reached out to her and said, listen, I can file a lawsuit against you too because of you being there. You were present. You were a witness. Maybe. Do you think that this is a person who maybe already settled her claims so that she would be a cooperating witness for Tony Buzbee's case? I mean, tell me how you think that might work.
That would be a brilliant move if that's what Buzbee did, because otherwise he is making really, the worst, the harshest kinds of allegations, and he's signing his name to it. I mean, he referred to his client vetting a demand letter. Well, sure, the client is supposed to vet the demand letter for in terms of the factual allegations, but the legal allegations, the legal import of that is in the province of the attorney. So you can't necessarily just hide behind your client. But were he to have made a deal with Celebrity B, that would really backstop both his client and himself in terms of his potential exposure for being involved in frivolous litigation.
But you think Celebrity B would take any kind of deal where they have to testify and say, yeah, I was in a room while a 13-year-old was being sexually assaulted, and yeah, I'm not being sued now because I settled my claims? I mean, either way, if this is true and this person knows who Celebrity B was, I can't even imagine, even if they were a cooperating witness of some kind, that they don't look really, really bad from this.
I totally agree. I think that premise is dubious for the reasons you mentioned. I mean, Celebrity B, while it would be a terrible thing not to have reported these crimes, and they're very serious crimes if in fact they were committed, but it's unclear what, if any, civil liability Celebrity B would not have or would have for not being a good Samaritan. I mean, I think the statute on that, to the extent that there's any liability for not reporting, had long since been passed. So I don't think she would have any legal or factual incentive to make such a deal. I think her incentive would be not to cooperate at all and to deny that she witnessed any such thing.
Right. Let's get into a little bit of this legal warfare that's going on. What do you make of the fact that Buzbee revealed Jay-Z as Celebrity A based on what he says was a failure to meet on mediation, that this was a standard demand letter? What do you make of his version of events?
Well, I have one problem. I mean, he's right in the sense, as you know, Jesse, that it's standard and it's smart to give a potential defendant an opportunity to settle prior to sending prior to filing a lawsuit, because at that point, the plaintiff would have kind of detonated the grenade and forced the defendant in a position where he almost has to fight. Whereas when you send a demand letter and say that you're interested to talk and settle the matter on a confidential basis, that is an appropriate standard thing to do, assuming that you have a legitimate claim. Where I think he's on weaker ground is where he is litigating this in the media and making statements defending himself. One of my mentors always told me, never defend yourself, defend your client, and always remember that you're representing yourself. And the only time you answer any allegations against yourself is when a judge is specifically asking you to. And I think that Busby crossed that line in the sense that he's now giving press conferences talking about himself and his own actions when he should be representing his client. That's just my opinion, but I think it's unwise for him to get into a PR war.
Do you think that this rises to the level of extortion, as Jay-Z's claims? Because let me read you a portion from one of their filings. To coerce Mr. Carter into compliance, plaintiff and attorney Busby imposed an arbitrary deadline in their extortionate demand letter, warning Mr. Carter that they would take a different course if he did not agree to a confidential mediation to resolve this delicate and important matter. Without even waiting for the deadline provided by the extortionate demand letter to pass, attorney Busby posted on social media that he intended to file a lawsuit naming Mr. Carter and attaching the extortionate demand letter to punish Mr. Carter for seeking redress from a court. All along, Mr. Carter refused to bow to attorney Busby's scheme. Faced with the choice to either pay an exorbitant sum to silence plaintiff's wild, false allegations of sexual assault, risking irreparable harm to his reputation, family, career, and livelihood, or face a barrage of baseless lawsuits and financial ruin, Mr. Carter stood his ground. On November 18, 2024, Mr. Carter filed a complaint against attorney Busby and his law firm for his extortionate conduct. So a little bit what you said about the media, but what do you take about that version of events?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with Busby giving a deadline. You really have to give a deadline. Otherwise, there's no incentive for the potential defendant to ever respond. But what the problem in this scenario is that he didn't give the defendant the full benefit of the deadline. In other words, if you give somebody a deadline, respond by December 27th, you shouldn't say anything until December 27th. Unless the defendant has already said, no, we're not going to pay, go ahead and file your lawsuit. So I think if you give somebody a deadline, I think you should honor it. You shouldn't act prematurely. If you go public prematurely, it's a badge of bad faith. Whether it is bad faith or not is open to question, but it's, I think if you've got to be true to your word. If you want to give them a deadline, let them have until the deadline.
Also, I want your thoughts real quick on something else, Ben. The idea that Jane Doe should have to reveal her identity, and whether or not the court will say she has to reveal her identity, and B, is that the proper move from Jay-Z's camp to do? So there's two sides to this. Busby says in part, sensitive, details of sexual assault, her having to reveal that is incredibly traumatic. The media attention on this case would create a chilling effect from other people coming forward. Combs has made threats of violence in the past, so her, revealing herself could be problematic. Jay-Z argues, look, I have a right to know who my accuser is, to research that person. People won't come over with helpful evidence that could help my case, my defense, if they don't know who this person is. The public has a right to know who she is. She is the one who filed the lawsuit, put her credibility into issue by voluntarily filing a lawsuit. Who's right?
I have fairly strong opinions on this since I've had several clients who've been in that position, and I think that Jay-Z's counsel is absolutely right on this. If you make serious allegations of this nature, you shouldn't be able to hide behind the shield of anonymity. These are incredibly serious. I mean, to me, I would rather be accused of murder than rape of a child. If you were going to make these kinds of allegations, I think you have to be revealed. Now, exceptions for that are the ones you mentioned. If this victim or alleged victim were still underage, I think there'd be a strong argument for protecting what would be a child. But this is an adult woman at this point. Second, exception is the one you also referenced, the possibility of violence. Now that's quite real, and I think that's something the judge would have to weigh. Although I don't think there's any indication that any threats have emanated from Jay-Z's camp.
Right.
But absent something like that, a real showing of potential danger should the plaintiff's name be revealed, I think it's absolutely fair for the accuser's name to be mentioned. And the reason why, I think also in terms of the fairness, is that if that person's name is out there, then people may come forward. You know, if there have been I had a case where we did a similar thing, that our client was accused of civilly of sexual battery, and we moved the court to have that adult plaintiff named. The court granted that, and when that happened, we got all kinds of communications from the public at large saying, we know this person. And it turned out that person had a lot of skeletons in his closet. And frankly, we would not have had access to that but for, that information being out there. So I think Jay-Z's slightly different situation because he's got a lot of resources and, great lawyers at his disposal. But I think in terms of fairness, the presumption should be that a plaintiff should be named.
What does all this mean for Jay-Z? And could there be more lawsuits? Could this lead to criminal charges? So there is a lot to break down with this. But here's the thing. I'm not going to talk about this by myself. I have a special guest, and I have a special guest who is actually with me. First time in studio, somebody who all of you will recognize if you follow us here on Sidebar. We usually have him on Zoom, but now we have him here in person. Renowned criminal defense attorney to the stars, Bradford Cohen is with us. Bradford, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we haven't had a chance to talk about the fact that Jay-Z's been named as a defendant in this civil suit. What's your reaction to that?
So, it's interesting because, obviously this civil suit was coming for a while.
Yep.
And there was some talk between Busby and Jay-Z's lawyers. I think both Busby and Jay-Z's lawyers are really alphas. So when you have that
combination, what gives you that idea?
When you have that combination, and listen, there's many criminal defense attorneys and civil attorneys that I put in under that kind of dome of alphas. And when you have two that are going at each other, especially when it's contentious, like this type of accusation, I think it's not a surprise what's going on, like in terms of them investigating Busby throwing bombs their way. So I don't see this going away very quickly. And I think that it's not a shock that it came because you knew that Jay-Z and Puffy were close. And when it said celebrity one in the original complaint, I kind of assumed that it was going to be someone like a Jay-Z. That doesn't mean that those accusations have any bearing whatsoever if they're true or not true, because we haven't seen all of the evidence. It's just the accusations. And as you know, Busby is one of those lawyers that he likes the show, he likes the circus. So I don't know if you can take everything as true in terms of the actual complaint itself, in terms of investigating it. It's just a hard thing to tell because Busby does that. That's what he's known for.
I've seen legal analysts talk about this, and they say Tony Busby, renowned Texas lawyer, he wouldn't go forward with a case like this because when he first came onto the scene in the Diddy case, he said he's gotten an intake of 3,000 calls, but he's been selective about who he's chosen to represent, that he wouldn't represent this Jane Doe in a case against Sean Combs or Jay-Z unless he felt he had the evidence. What do you think about that?
I think when you're in that community and you're friends with a lot of lawyers, they'll always back you up and say, oh, he wouldn't take a case that was BS. Who knows? We won't know until the evidence starts coming out. Jay-Z seems very, very adamant that this didn't take place. He says, go to the police, go talk to the police. If you think that there's something that happens and file a police report.
I'll get to that in a second. He can't settle at this point, right? I mean, you tell me. Some people say, I'm going to fight this, and then they end up settling. But look what happened with Sean Combs. He settled the Cassandra Ventura lawsuit the day after it was filed. They did a whole episode on was it a mistake for him to even allow that to be filed. At this point, he can't risk settling because it'll look like an admission, right?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things going on. So some inside baseball, when Sean Combs was negotiating that, I spoke to some lawyers that were involved, and I was like, even if the accusations are false, there's two ways to go about these cases. Either one, you do the economic analysis, right? What is this going to cost me? Where is it going? How much am I going to lose? All these different things, even if it's false, right? How much are the attorneys going to cost me, right? And then you decide whether or not you want to do that. The second way to that, and I call this the Sparta route, that's number two. The Sparta route is you go all out and go to war. Right. There's no in between there. Mr. Miyagi always says, walk on one side of the road, you're safe. Walk on the other side of the road, you're safe. Walk in the middle, you get squashed. And that's what happened to Shawn Combs, right? So he kept saying, like, listen, I'm not paying. This is Sparta. I'm not paying. I'm not going to pay her a dime. Then she files, and then the next day he pays. That's the worst case scenario, because then it's just open season on Shawn Combs. And that's what happened. So Jay-Z should learn something from that. His lawyers are not the type that would say, okay, let's settle now. I don't see that ever happening. Yeah. I think he will spend whatever it takes to make sure that his name is cleared, or at least make the attempt to make sure his name is cleared. And I don't think there is a budget to that.
I want to read you something. So this is something from the amended complaint. It reads, Combs has been allowed for years to conduct himself in this manner without any consequences. He believes he is above the law. He is not. His close friend Shawn Carter, Jay-Z, has been with Combs during many such instances described herein. Both perpetrators must face justice. If we're thinking about the bigger question here, Bradford, he seems to be indicating there are multiple alleged instances of misconduct revolving around Jay-Z. Does that mean that he is prepared to file more lawsuits against him with more Jane or John Does? If that were the case, because then you're entering into Shawn Combs territory, who there was the Cassandra Ventura lawsuit, and then there was lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. What do you think?
So I think what he's saying is leading to that. I don't know if he actually has the goods to do it. A lot of times lawsuits are like playing poker. Like even when you feign, that you have strength, it could be that you have some weakness in your case. So Busby's never going to say that he doesn't have the evidence. I mean, Busby's always going to say he's got the evidence. He's always going to say, oh, we're going to look at multiple other people. We're going to do all this, because he wants to put that fear into that individual, because he thinks these individuals have done it. In his mind, he thinks these individuals have done multiple, even if he doesn't have the evidence now, yeah, he thinks he can develop that evidence, through discovery, through pictures, through other people seeing it. So what he does is he files the first lawsuit, in my opinion. He files the first lawsuit. That first lawsuit, he has some evidence towards whatever it is. And he's hoping people see, oh, wait, Jay-Z, there's a crack in the wall. And then all of a sudden he gets another 3 calls, 4 calls. Hey, this was what, right. So, and that's how these cases go. And that's why he makes them so public. That's why he makes all these statements. That's why he goes on these shows. Because he wants other people to say, hey, I was in a room with Jay-Z and I did this. And, all those have to be, you have to shake those out, because everyone's going to want a piece. And if you've seen the past lawsuits that have been filed, some are complete bogus lawsuits filed against Shawn Combs. I mean, I've read some that are just horrible. In terms of like just the allegations, they haven't really put forth a lot of evidence, a lot of facts, a lot of dates. Some are better than others. And the Busby ones, he tries to put in as much salacious information as he can, because he knows that will put more blood in the water and that will get more people out.
The problem with Shawn Combs is, there was lawsuit after lawsuit, there was lawsuit, and then there was the criminal charges. But even before there was the criminal charges, there was the video, the 2016 videotape that was released of him beating Cassandra Ventura. So when that came out, it looked like every one of these allegations is true. I mean, there's most people will say Shawn Combs right now is guilty until proven innocent.
Correct.
And I think that's what Jay-Z wants to avoid, is more people coming down the pike.
Yeah, and that video was really a turning point.
I wanted to add something to this. So it was revealed that Jay-Z had actually sued Tony Busby anonymously, claiming he was extorting the rapper. You settle or I will sue you for what Jay-Z claims are false allegations. And in his lawsuit against Tony Busby, and again, we didn't know it was Jay-Z at the time, now we seem to do, there was this statement: plaintiff John Doe is the victim of a scheme by defendant Anthony G. Busby and his firm, the Busby Law Firm, who are shamelessly attempting to extort exorbitant sums from him or else publicly file wildly false, horrific allegations against him. Defendants have threatened to unleash entirely fabricated and malicious allegations of sexual assault, including multiple instances of rape of a minor, both male and female, against plaintiff if he refuses to comply with their demands. So Bradford, does that mean that Busby, again, going back to this idea, he seems to have indicated, Jay-Z, that Tony Busby came forward that I don't just have Jane Doe, I have more people too,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, I think
that's a little bit of opening of the curtain there.
There is. I think that he came forward with multiple individuals, or saying that he had multiple individuals. I think that was the demand letter that was first sent. And when you represent individuals, like I've represented A to Z, right? And some people that people know I've represented, some people that they have no idea that I represented. And sometimes we'll get these letters, not necessarily in the same type of vein of sexual assault and things like that, but it could be that there was some sort of physical assault. Someone got punched, someone got hurt, and then they send a demand letter saying like, hey, this is what happened, XYZ. Normally the demand letters are pretty plain Jane. This one sounds a little bit different in terms of the accusations that were made, in terms of the amount of money that was sought. We don't know exactly. I think that he attached one of the demand letters to one of the filings, Mr. Busby did. So I think that's where this is all coming from in terms of, where these names are and who they are, obviously is going to be very important, because then you can start kind of investigating those individuals and seeing if they're really true.
I want a criminal aspect. This is the part that we haven't had a chance to talk about. I wanted to ask you about potential criminal charges, because when this lawsuit came out, I'm going to lay it out here. So Jay-Z posted a statement online. And aside from saying that Busby basically tried to blackmail him and his lawyer has called this extortion, but there's this statement that reads in part, my lawyer received a blackmail attempt called a demand letter from a lawyer named Tony Busby. What he had calculated was the nature of these allegations and the public scrutiny would make me want to settle. No, sir, it had the opposite effect. It made me want to expose you for the fraud you are in a very public fashion. So no, I will not give you one red penny. But then he also says, these allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree? These alleged victims would deserve real justice if that were the case. The issue is that even possible? Is that a little disingenuous? Because could she even file a criminal complaint? You know, Tony Busby apparently told TMZ that Jane Doe is not ruling out filing a criminal complaint, saying, what happens next is up to my client, it's her case, and what she decides to do, you will find out in due course. But the question I have, hasn't the statute of limitations in New York run? Does it make it not even a possibility? I've seen some say that if we imagine this to be third-degree rape of a minor, that it was 5 years statute of limitation. I believe that was maybe changed to 10 years, but then the clock doesn't run until you're no longer a minor. But even if you calculate that, I think it's still too old of a claim. You're talking about something from 24 years ago. I've seen others say that if there was a change in the law, which there apparently was in New York, and the statute of limitations were removed for a certain sex crime, that can't be applied retroactively. Constitutionally, it wouldn't be allowed. Now, Nima Rahmani, who's a frequent legal analyst here on Sidebar, told Fox News, when Jay-Z tells the victim and Busby to file criminal charges, that's a red herring. Your thoughts?
It can be. I don't know. Honestly, like I was doing this analysis as well.
Yeah.
Like whether or not you can relate it back, whether or not there could be charges that could be filed. I think that letter from Jay-Z, like, listen, Jay-Z, as much money as he has, Jay-Z's a street guy, right? And he doesn't take this lightly. And I do think that he's never going to settle. I think he's going to go to war and take this as far as he can. Do I think it's disingenuous for him to say, hey, go file a criminal complaint? I think in his mind, he might not know what the statute of limitations is. He might not know whether or not she can file. And he might be honestly saying, like, listen, go to the police, file a police report. And here's the thing. Even if the statute of limitations ran, it doesn't stop her from filing a police report. It doesn't stop her from giving a statement to the police. It still backs up some things. And don't forget, in federal court, he could still be swept up into a RICO. There could be other sorts of actions that took place over time, and all of those would relate back. So if it's a federal crime, I mean, they're looking at Diddy for things that occurred way out of the statute of limitations, because it's almost like a RICO, right? So they're relating it back in time and saying this is an ongoing criminal kind of conspiracy that this has been going on. So when he says go to the police, file a police report, he could be swept up if it's true. he could be swept up into the Shawn Combs stuff. So I don't think he's being disingenuous by it, because yeah, maybe in state court that might be true that it can't be filed on, but in federal court, if they make it part of an ongoing conspiracy and your co-conspirator was arrested, then they can still sweep you up into it.
I remember the Jeffrey Epstein case. He was charged federally with respect to minors back in the incidents in the 90s. But again, if it comes out that Jay-Z is sued by more people, right, then that federal case could be more of a reality.
Correct. And like I said, I don't think if it was a red herring, it would mean like, okay, there's no chance, right? In my opinion, when it's a red herring, that means there's no chance that there could be. And I honestly think there could be a chance if someone made a police report and they felt that it was an ongoing criminal conspiracy with Shawn Combs or with anyone else, they could sweep all of those up into a federal charge.
Now, Bradford, before we've talked a little bit about the back and forth, the demand letter. You can, if you think, is there anybody breaking protocol here by how it happened? But what about this separate issue about whether or not Jane Doe should have to proceed by revealing her identity? Tony Busby says that she should proceed anonymously in this case. It's a way to protect her, given the threats of violence from Shawn Combs, the sensitive nature of these allegations, that if she was identified and talking about what happened to her or allegedly happened to her, could re-traumatize her. Jay-Z says, look, he has a right to know who she is and challenge her. Who's right?
So this is a very tricky situation, right? So it depends. It's like a lawyer answer. It depends. So if you can say that she's in danger because of what Shawn Combs has allegedly made threats to witnesses and things like that, that's very strong to say, hey, we need to just keep the initials. I always make the argument, even if it's not made public, I have to know who she is. I have to know all the information. I have to know that information now so I can start doing my research. I can start figuring out who it is. It's not always necessarily prudent to make someone public in these situations because of physical threats. My argument would be that she hasn't received any physical threats. This is something that happened allegedly 24 years ago. We need to do full, background. And not only that, individuals that may know her, when it comes out that this is a public, this is her name, those individuals may want to come forward. So like if I just find out it's Jane Doe and the public doesn't know it, how do I start asking individuals, hey, had you have interactions with her? Does she have a veracity for truthfulness? What if someone that she was roommates with, she stole a check from? I don't know any of those things. And when you don't make those individuals public, you're really at a loss, because once that name is public, it's just like blood in the water. Yep. People that know you may come forward. People, a worker at McDonald's may say, I remember, these things happen, right? These things happen. So all that happens when things are made public. I'm a big fan of pulling back the curtain on everything. Let's look at it all. Let's figure out if this is truthful, especially when it's heinous accusations like this. Like someone should say, hey, this is who it is. And I understand the other side of that, but I think the weight should go to really the defendant in this case, and really make that public so they can really hammer down and find out if it's true.
Well, right now in other Shawn Combs cases, judges have ruled that the Jane Does have to reveal themselves, so we'll see if that happens there. Look, they obviously want her to reveal herself for a number of reasons. One, they say if she doesn't reveal herself, they think that this lawsuit should be thrown out. I think they also probably imagine that if she reveals herself, maybe she won't continue with this case if the world knows who she is. But here's what's really interesting. One of the reasons they say they want to know who she is and properly investigate her claims to see if they're true, or what they seem to be alleging, whether or not Busby and his firm are kind of pushing her in a certain direction, this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, is that Jay-Z's lawyers, his counsel, filed a letter with the court, and they said that a woman called their offices randomly. She says that she called Tony Busby's firm regarding allegations of sex trafficking and abuse, but it had nothing to do with Shawn Combs. She made it clear to them. And she says, even though she made it clear to them, the firm representative asked her, when did you meet Diddy? And she reemphasized again, my claims aren't about him. So she even said that they encouraged her to proceed anonymously. She didn't want to do that. They also discouraged her from contacting law enforcement. She said she felt pressured to make false claims about what happened to her, about being drugged, held down, physically assaulted. She said that really didn't happen. And she says that when she refused to adopt the narrative that Busby's firm had seemingly wanted her to go forward with, she was dropped as a client. And the associate who spoke with this woman recounted this conversation in a sworn declaration with the court, claimed that this woman, quote, felt forced to lie. Now, Jay-Z's firm says that this is further evidence that Jane Doe, in his lawsuit, she shouldn't be able to proceed anonymously, that Jay-Z and his team have a right to thoroughly investigate and respond to these allegations. But, according to TMZ, Busby responded, saying, "This is ridiculous. If someone calls our intake and has a viable case that we believe has merit and we can pursue, we will pursue it. We're currently pursuing hundreds of cases against individuals other than P. Diddy. What we won't do is pursue a case that we don't believe has merit." And I can't speak to what she told the intake folks to even tell you what this woman claimed if and when she called. And he says, "We certainly don't need to pressure anyone to pursue a case." And in a legal filing, Busby says, "I categorically deny all of the baseless allegations levied by Mr. Carter and his counsel." And he goes on to say, "We will also address verifiable improprieties committed by defense counsel, outright illegal conduct for which we have actual evidence." What do you make of that?
Very little.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought this was bigger than that.
Nah, listen, I think that this is posturing. I don't know. So I think it's big on the woman that's saying that she was forced to lie and things of that nature. As long as we can verify that she's telling the truth, if there's a way to verify that she's actually telling the truth on what was said and how it was done. Now, don't forget, like, when people come to your office or people discuss things with you, they're not lawyers. Right? So if you say, "Hey, listen, you should really go in anonymously. This shouldn't be something that you want your name out there for," or things like that you're giving advice, they may take that the wrong way.
Sure.
I don't know. So that's kind of the first part of that, right? The second part of that is that she felt forced to lie about something. Again, I don't know what the language was. It's not a good accusation if it's true. But again, a lot's lost in the language of that. So I don't immediately, put Busby on the cross and say, okay, like he did something wrong. I don't know. Same thing from Busby saying like, "Oh, we have evidence the defense did all these things." That's a lot of posturing, and I think there's a lot of posturing going on in this case. Like, everyone's kind of beating their chest, everyone's lining up, all the shields are going down and the spears are coming out. So it doesn't surprise me that they're going at it like this and that he's saying, "Oh, they did things wrong," and they're saying he did things wrong. Because in this type of case, when the accusations are what the accusations are, the lawyers start attacking each other because there's such heinous accusations. And the way these lawyers operate, especially Mr. Busby, and I know Alex Spiro as well.
Yeah.
And my interactions with Alex Spiro has always been good. Like, I've never seen him do something underhanded or anything like that.
By the way, just so everybody, this is a guy who's represented Elon Musk,
Sure.
Alec Baldwin. So he's a very high. Oh, he's Mayor Eric Adams here in New York. So
Correct.
You know him,
Yeah, I know him, and I think that. I've never seen him do anything underhanded. I've talked to him about cases. I've never heard of anything. I know the firm he works for. In fact, one of my good friends is the managing partner of that firm. So I don't know anything that he would have done that could be underhanded. And I think it's just a lot of posturing, and the attorneys are going at each other because that's this type of case. You got a very aggressive attorney on one side, Busby, who goes after everybody. He's like an ex-Marine, and I think he takes it very seriously. He's like F. Lee Bailey back in the day, Marine to Marine. So, that kind of guy. And when you get that kind of guy, and then you get an Alex Spiro on the other side, that's kind of like me, and they were both aggressive, and we both kind of do those things. That's what happens. You get a lot of accusations like this.
I mean, Busby is basically accusing them of engaging in illegal conduct, whether it's, he used the word defamation at one point. He said that their filings were improper. I think that he's also challenging their tactics about going after him and his firm. And on the other hand, you have Jay-Z and his counselor saying, this guy's engaging in extortion. So it's not just bad vibes. It's not just lawyering where they're disagreeing. They're accusing each other essentially of either breaking the law or breaking ethics rules.
Yeah, and like I said, the thing that I think is more serious, the young lady who said that she felt she was forced to lie, I think that's a serious accusation. And if it's held to be true, that is a death blow, right? If that is true. What they have, where he's saying...
But does that relate, though, to the idea of Jane Doe having to proceed anonymously or not? Or is it... Because you're basically saying... the argument's tenuous, right? Because this woman called our office and said the Busby firm is engaging in some underhanded kind of things, we have a right to now more thoroughly investigate Jane Doe because she might be being pressured by Busby, or we don't know what her claims are. It's a little bit of a tenuous argument.
It's a tenuous argument, but it undermines, whenever you can undermine another lawyer or a lawsuit or anything like that in terms of veracity for truthfulness, that's not good, right? No judge likes to read that some lady was forced to say something or that she was forced to lie. And if it's true and a judge finds that out, that's not good, because you can never, my dad used to say a reputation is like building a wall, right? It's like one brick at a time, one brick at a time. But what can happen is one boulder comes through and it knocks the whole wall down, and then you can never rebuild that wall.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing when it comes to judges. If you're going to do something underhanded and the judge finds something like that out, you don't get that back. You don't get that credibility back. Just like in the Diddy case where, one book didn't say legal on it, and then when he got it, it said legal on it. That doesn't come back. There's always that in the back of your mind.
The judge doesn't forget it.
The judge never forgets it.
All right, so it's not even been a week since this was filed. Let's see what happens next week. I'm sure the back and forth will continue. Bradford Cohen, my goodness, thank you so much for coming in. Great to see you in person.
Great to see you.
Federal charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking through force, fraud, or coercion, transportation to engage in prostitution. And remember, investigators allege that Combs was using his power, his wealth, his influence to force people to participate in so-called freak-offs, these prolonged sex orgies that sometimes involve drugs and commercial sex workers. My gosh, how many times I've said freak-offs in the past 3 months is pretty unbelievable, but again, that's where we are. So anyway, there we have the criminal charges, but we also can't forget the civil lawsuits. They continue to pour in against Combs, and new witnesses also reportedly are testifying before the grand jury in the criminal case. So we're waiting to see, one of the things we're waiting to see is if the government will file a superseding indictment, adding or amending those federal charges, possibly, maybe even adding defendants too. We'll see. Now, to be clear, and it's always important to emphasize this, Combs has not only denied all wrongdoing, but he has not been found guilty of any sex crime or found liable in any of these civil suits. I say he's denied all wrongdoing, but he did essentially admit to his actions on that 2016 surveillance tape of him beating his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura in a hotel hallway. Even his mother, in a legal statement, seemed to acknowledge that was him. But putting that to the side, the rapper was arrested outside of his hotel in New York City back in September. And his attorneys say, look, he had planned to turn himself in, but agents arrived a day early to take him into custody. He's been at the Metropolitan Detention Center ever since. And his attorneys have argued from really the very beginning several times that the steps taken by the prosecution are not only wrong, but they say they're unconstitutional. They want this case thrown out. What we want to do right now is get into the latest battle over what's called a filter team or taint team. Now, Combs' counsel says that the group, which is supposed to help protect Combs and keep the prosecution from seeing privileged information, isn't doing its job. So what is a filter team? Why are they controversial? Well, I'm not going to talk about this by myself. I have somebody to help me answer that. Going to break down what is going on here between the prosecution and the defense. So to join me to talk about this, I want to bring back on State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg is back with us. Dave, good to see you.
Jesse, great to be with you.
What is a filter team, Dave?
Remember when the feds raided Rudy Giuliani's house? Remember that? Giuliani's a lawyer, and so you can't go into attorney-client privilege. So how do the feds know the difference between what they're allowed to see and what they're not allowed to see? What is privileged and what is not?
And privileged, you mean private communications between his attorneys or things that are done in anticipation of the trial, right? Work product.
Correct. The prosecutors aren't allowed to see everything. There are limits.
Yep.
And you have the Constitution, that pesky thing called the Constitution. There's the Fourth Amendment. You've got attorney-client privilege and all these other privileges, executive privilege. So to prevent the prosecutors from being tainted with information they're not allowed to see, they have what's called a taint team.
These are prosecutors?
Yeah, people from within the Department of Justice. They have special prosecutors. And because the word taint team was kind of unseemly and ugly, they decided to change it to filter team. So now we call it the filter team. And that's all it is. It's just the people who stand between the actual prosecutors on the case and the defendant.
And they are not part of the case at all. They're not prosecuting Shawn Combs. They are separate, independent. That's what they're supposed to be.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So with that in mind, Combs' defense team, they have raised serious concerns about this filter team before. And it was mostly in connection with photographs of notes that were taken from Shawn Combs' cell or his unit at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which the defense says were protected under attorney-client privilege. So back in October, there was a federal raid at the MDC. It reportedly had nothing to do with Combs being there, this is according to officials, but it was pre-planned. Seems Combs' defense lawyers would disagree. They said this is really just a pretext. But as part of that sweep, Combs was questioned and photographs were taken of items that were found in his unit as part of this search for contraband. And we told you before, the MDC is just notorious for drugs, weapons, all sorts of violence and misconduct. But according to prosecutors, an investigator at the Bureau of Prisons let prosecutors know that the photos were taken of Shawn Combs' writings, these notes, these potential communications. So to be on the safe side, prosecutors say they had the photos go through the filter team first, and some of the photos were sent back to the government, who apparently used them as evidence as part of their opposition to Shawn Combs getting bail. What evidence? Well, in one of their filings in support of keeping Combs behind bars, the government wrote, "The government argued that the defendant was actively continuing his efforts to obstruct justice while in custody, including by, among other things, attempting to influence witness testimony. In support, the government cited excerpts of portions of the photographs that discussed the defendant paying a potential witness and on other potential victims and witnesses, which had been provided to the government after review by the government's filter team." So the defense argued that the notebooks had the word legal written across the top, indicating, they were privileged, they shouldn't be looked through, they shouldn't be photographed. But that led to a hiccup because the judge wanted to know exactly when legal was written on one or several of these notebooks. And he also wanted to know if the defense was maybe trying to mislead the court on this issue, even called the defense out for maybe not being entirely accurate with when it was labeled or what was labeled. But in the end, Judge Arun Subramanian, the judge overseeing this case, did order the prosecution to get rid of copies of 19 pages of material and said that they couldn't use it as evidence in their motion to deny bail at this upcoming bail hearing. And by the way, that bail hearing ended with Shawn Combs being denied bail a third time. But the judge did set a schedule for briefing and arguing about whether the photographs were a violation of Shawn Combs' rights and what would the remedy be. Now, the defense is very unhappy with how the prosecutors and filter team are currently handling things, and they filed a motion for a hearing, suppression, and other relief. And according to that filing, the defense claims that the prosecution bypassed protocol that was in place for what to do if they received privileged information, and instead the filter team just gave mostly everything over to the government. In their filing, the defense gave several examples of cases from around the country where the validity of a filter team has been questioned, some dating back to 1994, others as recent as 2022. And the defense writes, "The cases above recognize that in general, the use of a neutral arbiter, such as a special master, is more likely to protect a defendant's rights than the use of a prosecutorial taint team. And whatever the general merits of the taint team procedure, the filter team in this case utterly failed. Despite seeing references to defense experts, paralegals, witnesses, cross-examination strategy, and even names of defense lawyers, it failed to mark the material as privileged." They go on to say this extraordinary violation of Mr. Combs' Fourth and Sixth Amendment rights also constitutes outrageous government conduct that violates his Fifth Amendment right to due process. These are serious allegations. What do you make of it?
Well, I disagree with the defense lawyers that this is outrageous political or prosecutorial conduct, because the prosecutors have been doing this type of thing for years. Remember, this was the argument that the defense is making that Donald Trump made in the Mar-a-Lago documents case, that before prosecutors should ever look at anything retrieved, we need to go to a special master first. That's what Judge Cannon
What's a special master?
That's like a judge, a magistrate who will review the documents. This is what the defense here wants. They don't want the prosecutor to say. They essentially say that the taint team is tainted, because how do you have a neutral set of prosecutors when you work for the Department of Justice? Your colleagues are the prosecutors, but that happens all the time. And when Donald Trump and Judge Cannon tried to make this argument, they lost, because the appellate court said, no. It is fine for the filter team to do this because they're not involved in the case. Also, prosecutors take an oath. If they find exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that could clear someone, they have to turn it over. It's different than a defense lawyer who's purely seeking the interests of the defendant.
But their argument would be, these are materials that are clearly attorney-client or work product privilege, and it was handed over to the prosecutors improperly. And look what the judge said. The judge said, delete get rid of the 19 pages of copies you have. So, I mean, again, talk to me about, do they have an argument here, the defense? And B, what rights does he have while in detention? He talks about his due process rights. I mean, also, I believe his rights to reasonable search and seizures, a Sixth Amendment right. Talk to us about what rights he has while being detained, and also, does he have an argument here?
Well, this whole situation shows that the process works. It works because the filter team reviewed it. The filter team made a determination that these were not covered by attorney-client privilege, pass it on, and then the judge said, no, I disagree. We're going to throw it all out. And the prosecutors were not able to use that. The system works. You know, no one is perfect. This is a judgment call. But also, I think it is kind of interesting that the judge sort of shared my suspicions that it looks like Diddy wrote the term legal on everything. Like,
well, we don't know if it was him or someone else.
Someone.
Yeah.
But, you know, just by putting the term legal doesn't make it privilege. You know, it's not like you can say Beetlejuice and all of a sudden everything disappears, because here it looks like a lot of the stuff was not really privilege, was evidence of witness tampering. But they got away with it because they put the term legal, and the judge said, you know, we're going to err on the side of protecting the defendant, which is why, to your last question, the system is working because the defendant continues to have protection. Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial, to right to a lawyer, the Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable searches and seizures. You have all these protections, attorney-client privilege. And so the judge here is recognizing that and protecting Diddy's rights, and so I think the system worked.
Is there a scenario where an indictment can be thrown out because of serious violations of privilege or constitutional rights? Because that's what they're asking for.
Well,
one of the things they're asking for.
That's why they're saying this is outrageous conduct by the prosecutors. If this was an innocent mistake, then no, it would not be thrown out. If it was intentional misconduct, then yes, that could happen. That could be the penalty. That's what they're going for. But there's no evidence there is intentional misconduct. They went through the proper process that's used in every case where you have this filter team. The filter team says this is privilege, this is not. And if the judge disagrees, the judge throws it out. That's exactly what happened here.
They're also asking, I think, for a minimum to look into this filter team, also look into the prosecutors, and maybe possibly disqualify any of the prosecutors who were involved in this. And the way I think you would look at that is to say, you know, A, if they engaged in wrongdoing, they shouldn't be part of the prosecution. But B, if they've already viewed what was privileged and work product, if they've already viewed privileged material, they shouldn't prosecute this case. That's not fair to Shawn Combs. What would your argument be to that?
Depends how damaging the privileged material is. If it's because the filter team gave them something that they're not allowed to see, and it only pertains to the question of pretrial release, well, that doesn't go to the ultimate issue of the case. That should not disqualify the prosecutors. If the prosecutors saw something that they should not see as to whether Shawn Diddy Combs is guilty or not, then perhaps that is an argument that that prosecutor should be removed from the case. But there's no evidence of that here. There's no evidence of intentional wrongdoing. What you're seeing is very well-paid, very aggressive defense lawyers doing their jobs for their high-profile, wealthy client.
So going back to this motion for a hearing, at the conclusion of it, the defense listed out steps that it thinks should be taken, directing that a special master, like we talked about, a judge, conduct privilege review in lieu of the filter team going forward. Now, after the defense filed this motion, the government responded, and they requested more time to essentially get their ducks in a row and file a full response. So this filing from December 5th reads, the government respectfully submits this letter motion to request an adjournment of the briefing schedule in connection with the motion filed by the defendant last night. Now, obviously, the court set a schedule for filings related to these notes. I mentioned about whether there was a violation regarding these notes that were photographed at the MDC, and that meant that the government's opposition paper was due December 9th. The prosecution's arguing they need more time than that, at least as much time as the defense had to file their own motion. So the government offered their own proposed timeline, which would give them until December 20th. The prosecution said that in their request, they needed to adequately respond to the myriad issues raised in the defendant's brief. Specifically, given that the government's case team cannot respond to certain arguments advanced in the defendant's brief regarding privilege because the case team is no longer in possession of the notes at issue, the government must add an assistant United States attorney to the filter team to take on that response. Additionally, given the breadth and scope of the extraordinary relief requested by the defendant, an adjournment is appropriate. The judge apparently granted that motion. Dave, what do you think?
Well, I understand. I mean, the prosecution is entitled to time to respond to these allegations. When the defense is trying to bounce these prosecutors off the case entirely, they want us to take a step back and say, all right, let's talk about this, especially because they do not have access to the materials in question. So the defense is saying you should never have seen this. Look what's here. And the prosecutor is saying we don't have it. A lot of this stuff was in the possession of the filter team. Other stuff we had, and then the court took it away. So to give us more time, we need more personnel, and we need to fully brief this issue.
Long term, if the judge says something was really wrong here, at the very least, could that evidence not come in to trial? Could it be suppressed? If it's evidence of obstruction, him attempting to reach out to people, that would be really good for the prosecution's case, because obstruction is one of the underlying crimes of the racketeering conspiracy case, the criminal enterprise. You think there's a chance that evidence won't be allowed in?
It depends on whether there was prosecutorial misconduct. If there was misconduct, if it was bad faith, then yes, but there's no evidence of that. Remember the Lori Vallow Daybell case in Idaho?
No, I don't remember it.
Yes, the cult mob.
I lived 2 years of that case.
Right?
Yeah, 3 years.
The court took the death penalty off the table. Why? Not because of anything she did or said.
No.
It's because the prosecutors were slow in turning over discovery. So there are sanctions that courts can use to punish prosecutors. Now, if the prosecutors here were extra slow, no evidence of that, or extra dirty, no evidence of that, then yeah, you could have things like evidence suppressed or charges thrown out. I don't think that's going to happen.
I want to ask you about this. So let me take everybody to December 10th. So this is 10 days before the new due date for the government's response. The court receives a letter from 2 assistant U.S. attorneys who recently joined the filter team to help expedite these reviews. And those 2 AUSAs said that they're just trying to do their jobs, but they claim, and the prosecution claims, that the defense is basically stonewalling. So the filter team in this paper writes, in order to address this issue, the government asked the defendant to produce directly to the filter team unredacted copies of materials the defendant had filed ex parte with the court containing facts or analysis relevant to the defendant's privilege claims. And ex parte means that it was filed by one side without notice or input from the other side. Do it for, security reasons, safety reasons, privacy reasons. Anyway, this writing goes on to say the filter team understands from its conversations with the defense that the defense refuses to provide fully unredacted copies of the ex parte filings to the filter team because doing so would reveal additional attorney-client communications and or work product beyond what is reflected in the notes. The extensive redactions and the copies of the Garagos declarations the government has received, however, make it impossible to fully understand the basis for the defendant's claims of privilege as to each of the challenged portions of the notes, and thus to evaluate and adequately respond to the defendant's claims. So when the filter team talks about redactions, this is what we mean. Huge chunks of the declaration from defense attorney Tenny Garagos, they are blacked out. There's really nothing meaningful there. For example, one section reads, next he wrote, then it's blanked out. Then Mr. Combs notes there are blank to his counsel as to blank. There's another page that's almost entirely blacked out with the only readable words being, however, Mr. Combs has communicated to me several times. Now, the government writes, in the event the court would like the filter team to address the privilege issues, the filter team respectfully requests that the court order the defendant to provide unredacted copies of the ex parte filings directly to the filter team. This is the part I'm not sure I understand. So what they're saying is, if you say there is a privilege issue, we, the filter team, need to see these actual documents. But doesn't that defeat the purpose? They don't have a right to see his privilege materials. What am I not getting?
It's the filter team, not the prosecutors on the case. So the filter team should have access to it, especially if you're claiming there was prosecutorial misconduct. Remember, there are 11 these serious allegations against the Department of Justice, and they're trying to get the prosecutors bounced from this case. In the meantime, they're forcing these same prosecutors to respond, to fight with one hand tied behind their backs. They're saying, here, you have seen things you should not have seen. Meanwhile, they're not even telling the court what it is. And we're not saying that they should show the prosecutors that, just show the filter team who are separate from the prosecutors. There's a wall between them and the prosecutors on this case.
So the defense responded, and they objected to the unredacted paperwork being given to the filter team. And they point out in their filing, the government cites no authority supporting any such request. So the defense gave its own example, this United States v. Seglia case, which was argued in the Southern District of New York in 2015. And it says there, privileged documents were shared with a Wall AUSA pursuant to an agreement between the government and, I think that it said, the defendant. And when the Wall AUSA sought the disclosure of additional documents over the defendant's objections, the court denied the government's request and ordered the defendant to produce the documents directly to the court for an in-camera review. So, Dave, that means, and tell me if that's a possibility here, all this back and forth, give it to Judge Subramanian. He'll determine if there's actually a privilege violation. And by the way, in camera means not in front of a camera, it means in his chambers, private, right? So is that an option?
Yeah, that's an option. But then how can the prosecutors ever be thrown off the case when the defense doesn't show the filter team any of the information they say was wrongly shown to the prosecutors?
Show it to the judge.
Show it to the judge, and then the judge says, yeah, the filter team should see it, though. Why wouldn't the filter team see it? Like, what's the problem unless you don't trust the filter team?
Well, that's what they're saying. They're saying
it, right?
they're saying the filter team failed.
Well, the thing is that I understand the case they're citing, but what they're doing is redacting pretty much everything. Like we don't know in the case they cited how much of this good stuff was redacted. It could have been just a little bit here and there. But what the defense is doing, they're trying to have it both ways. They're saying this stuff is so inflammatory. This is going to kill our case. It should be a mistrial. These guys should be thrown off the case. But we're not going to tell the prosecutors what it is. We're not even going to tell the filter team what it is. At most, we'll tell the judge what it is, and then the judge will then say, "Okay, I agree." Or how do the prosecutors respond to that? What kind of defense can they make to the argument unless they have access, at least their filter team, to the material itself?
By the way, really simplistic question before I let you go. Does the judge review it himself? He's got court clerks. Can the court clerks review privileged material, or that's not right either?
Sure. Well, the judge depends on his clerks. So they can all do it.
Okay.
Also, there's a lot of material. The judge doesn't have that much
That's what
time.
I'm wondering. One person as opposed to a filter team. You're giving it to a judge to make the decision. That seems practically like it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it takes time, and these judges, they got other things to do. They got a golf game.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is a big case for Judge Arun Subramanian, and we will continue to follow it. This is just kind of a tangential issue, but the back and forth between the prosecution and defense attorneys continue. Dave Arenberg, great seeing you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.